Oh, hey guys. Dave here again. How's everybody doing? Thank you for coming back for episode 4 of the podcast. Nice to have you back. Thank you for everyone who's been checking it out. It's been very cool for me to have different friends and colleagues and so on check out the podcast. It's been a pretty personal endeavor for me, as hopefully you've picked up on. I've tried to be very brutally open and honest on here, and so it's cool to have people that I know hear that from that side from me as well. I think probably many of my friends and family members have heard bits and pieces of this over the years, but probably no one has heard all of it all at once, including me. So this has been a learning time for everybody. And thank you for coming on board. And thank you for so much positive feedback I've been getting, too. I really appreciate it. Thank you. It encourages me a lot. So keep it coming. I'm not sure if I've said this yet, but all of these so far have been just like a first take. I'll just sit down, start the recorder, and talk. I kind of plan out what I'm going to say, but I kind of do the first take and stop it, and then I just post that. I'm not doing rehearsals and all that kind of stuff. And that might make it come across a bit convoluted, a bit confusing. I might be a bit all over the place. There might be gaps where I'm trying to think of what to say next. But I kind of like how raw it is, because I think it's the most honest. And so, anyways, I appreciate your patience with the format as well. And just like those other weeks, we're going first take today. I will say, walking this line is a bit tough. One thing is I feel like to some degree I'm bugging everyone equally. Christian friends who maybe weren't aware of how serious my doubts are have become more concerned with me. And sorry. Or maybe even some of the things I've said so far have hurt you, or made you think I'm attacking you, which I don't mean to do that, but I can understand why you might think that. That makes me feel bad to think if I'm making someone else feel bad. But I'm not going to stop doing it. So tough. And then for me personally, like the difference, I think I've been pretty clear. I'm not really sure where I'm at right now, but the difference between a Christian who is having serious doubts and an atheist who is strongly reconsidering faith, like to me, that difference is infinitesimally small. That's a word, right? I think it is. It's a tiny difference. It's such a small difference between those positions that I'm not even sure there is much of a difference. And if there is, I don't know which one of those I am. It depends on the day. But I've become aware that to many other people, the difference is huge between those positions, or at least hugely important. So I know for some other folks, the thought of whether I'm in still or whether I'm out is very important to them. And this is Christian friends who hope that I'm still a Christian, and this is atheist friends who hope that I've finally smartened up. That that maybe is more important to some of you guys, maybe even than it is to me. I don't know, but that certainly I'm aware of that as I'm talking this stuff out. And I will say, I feel like I've been balanced in my approach so far, but I have not. My purpose is not to give a balanced view of these topics. My purpose is to be honest, and I feel like I honestly have good and bad to say. But it will be interesting for me looking back and listening back to these later and seeing, am I being balanced, or someone suggested to me that oftentimes when you're trying to talk about something like this, that you have emotion about it, you tend to just give the positive kind of a face value. You just kind of get through the positive side, and then really your heart is in the negative. And so I'm wondering if that's coming across a little bit. I guess we'll see. But I'm trying very hard to be honest, and I'm hearing from you guys that you're appreciating that. So thank you. I've had a number of people kind of say to me that they are identifying with some of the stuff I've said. No one has said they identify with all of it, so that's good. I'm glad no one is exactly where I am. But a lot of folks, feeling like they're kind of jiving with some of it. Some of it is making sense to them, and maybe you haven't heard someone else bring all this stuff up in the same place before. So if that's been good for you, then good. I wish that I could not just take you into those maybe darker places or whatever, but actually help you come back out the other side. If I was Tony Robbins, I'd have 8 steps to getting over hell. But I'm not, and I don't. So, but I can invite you in here with me and sit with you, and we can have a laugh, I guess. That's probably the best I can offer at this point. But we're going to keep going. I thought today I've had so much feedback, and we've done a few episodes now. I feel like I have enough of that I kind of just want to deal with that. I want to kind of recap a little bit what we've already talked about and go over some things that I wanted to re-say and answer back to some feedback and questions and comments that I've gotten. This is kind of a check-in with how we're doing so far episode, I guess. We'll see how long it ends up being. But that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. So in terms of the first episode, my story, most people, it was the least controversial one, I would say, because I wasn't really talking. I was telling my story, and I mean, who's going to tell you that your story sucks? You can think it, but you're not going to tell me that. So, I did, not a ton of feedback on that one, except my wife. By the way, this episode is dedicated to my wife, and all previous and further episodes are also dedicated to her, because her feedback was that I didn't mention her enough so far in the podcast. So, yeah, good. So, I love you, sweetie. And guys, my wife, she is a godlike character figure in my life. She loves so much. She knows everything. And she has a very detailed plan for my life. What at the end of this, if I'm like, yeah, I'm not a person of faith anymore, I hope I'll still have her, especially after this episode. But I love you, sweetie. And sorry I didn't shout you out earlier. My bad. Prayer. I got some feedback on the prayer podcast. In particular, some people kind of pushing back on me. Apparently, when I said the con with prayer is that it doesn't work, which I think, just from a comical timing and whatever perspective, I thought that was my best one. I have all these nice things. Prayer is good, good, good. And then if the problem is it doesn't work. Like that's, I found that funny. But a lot of folks kind of saying to me, hey, actually, sort of, not necessarily specific anecdotes I've been getting, but just sort of like, it does work. Like I found it does work. Kind of pushing back against that idea. And so I wanted to kind of dive into that a bit more. I'm not sure. I was pretty emotional talking about the prayer stuff. And maybe and again, I'm doing these first takes, so there's going to be some rewrites and some go back later and say, actually, I meant this. And I'm kind of learning and relearning again as we go. So I reserve the right to change my mind or change my story or I mean, just clarify what I meant. That's what I meant. So I want to talk about this and unpack it a little bit. I heard a Christian speaker, a very very famous Christian speaker who I look up to and think is just a great person, Tony Campolo. I heard him once say that people decide what they think is true first, and then they organize the information they have in such a way as to support that conclusion. And to his credit, Tony admitted that he did that too. He decided Christianity was true, and then he organized the information that he received in such a way as to support that conclusion. And I think that's just brilliant. And I think that I definitely do that. I think whatever side of the coin of faith or religion you fall on, you probably do that too. and very few of us just sort of objectively, follow the evidence to a conclusion. We tend to make our mind up and then have a subjective view on information and stuff as it happens around us. And I think talking about prayer and Christianity, I mean, Christians see most things through the lens of God exists, and they tend to see good things that happen in their life, quote unquote good things, are evidence of God's love. God realized how bad a day I was having, and when I went to pick up my friend at the store, it's always a busy parking lot, but there was an open parking spot for me. God did that good thing for me because of, he loves me and he knew how, I had a headache or whatever. Stuff like that. And it could be small things like that. It could be big things, but quote unquote good things, that's evidence of God's love. Bad things that happen, that's a result of sin. It's a result of either my sin nature, I lied about something, so I got caught, or I was lazy and didn't study for the test, so I got an F, or someone else's. The teacher didn't teach me right and then gave me the wrong test, and that's why I failed, or but it was a person's fault if something bad happens, or if it can't really be explained by that. They might go to God as testing me. I've been given this condition, I've been given this, affliction, I've been given this situation, and it's a test from God of my patience. I'm putting my Job complex on, and we'll kind of see if I can get through it. And look, everyone looks for meaning in situations like that. I've been around people who don't have any faith at all, and yet when something big happens in life, an accident, a major disease, a lottery win, there can be this sort of searching for meaning, and a lot of us have kind of weird kind of karma ideas about somehow we're impacting the universe in a way that's then coming back and doing good or ill for us, or just we all look for meaning a lot of times. That's not just a Christian thing. I think that's a human thing. But I think the notion that prayer works. I think it only makes sense if you're looking at it from a certain perspective. I think that's only a reasonable statement to make if you're looking at it from a certain perspective. And I think that perspective is, there's a God who's bigger than me, who knows what I need, and who answers in his own way. There's parts of the Bible, talks about if you ask for bread, God, who would give you a stone? If you ask for a fish, God's not going to give you a snake. This idea that if you're asking for good things for you, bread and fish to eat, he's not going to give you stones and snakes. He cares for you, and he wants to give you the good things that you're asking for. And I can remember teaching on this passage at my old church. I almost said the name of it. Can you imagine? That'd be crazy. No one would care. But I remember teaching on it and talking about what happens if you ask God for a snake. In other words, what's a proper response from God if the thing you're asking for is actually going to hurt you? What if you say, God, can you please give me this new job? And God knows that if you take that new job, it's going to be awful for you. Isn't it more loving for him in that circumstance to not grant your prayer, to withhold, And so prayer not working in the sense of sometimes I get what I want, sometimes I don't, makes sense if you're looking at it from that perspective, from that faith perspective. And perspective is very important when it comes to faith. This past week, I drove to Hamilton twice, once on Wednesday, once on Thursday. Wednesday, I was in a very good state of mind. I was having a good day. The trip to Hamilton was planned, It was a sunny day outside. I had been thinking about the podcast. I'd gotten some nice feedback and comments about it. I was feeling good. Doing this podcast has caused me to think back more than I have about my time at church and being a youth leader and some of the cool stuff that I got to experience and do. And I was feeling, the sun was out and all was well with the world. And I felt on my drive to Hamilton and home again, I almost felt like, man, I think God's here with me again. Like I felt that presence, and it was just like, maybe I am a Christian who's going through doubts. That's what I am. And then the next day, Thursday, it was cloudy, kind of an ugly day. And I realized I didn't do something in Hamilton the day before that I was supposed to. So I had to go back to Hamilton. Now I'm stressed. I got other things I'm supposed to do. I got to go back and do this job. I'm angry. I'm stressed out. And the sky is dark. And I can tell you, there was no presence of God that I felt on that drive. It was exactly the same experience. I drove the same roads, basically the same time of day. And yet it was a completely different experience. Now, I know Christian theology would say, look, God's with you whether you feel him or not. I understand that. But I'm just talking about from our perspective. It is funny to me and how differently you can experience the same thing based on your perspective. Praying for me, I'm not sure I talked enough about this. Praying for me has always made me feel better. And I can say very few objectively true things about prayer, but that is an objectively true thing. I have always felt better during and after a prayer than before. Always. And maybe that's enough to tell me, Dave, you should still be praying. But in terms of prayer working, for me, that's the prayer working, that I feel better, and that it might unify me with someone else and make me feel close to someone who I'm praying with. That's the power of it that I've seen, that I know works. When you say prayer works in terms of what you ask for happens, I have never had an answered prayer that could not be explained by coincidence or circumstance. Prayers for me are like the drive to Hamilton. If I have a certain perspective, then I think it came true. If I have a different perspective, then I think, no, God didn't do anything. Either this just happened or this just happened. And so when I said prayer doesn't work, I think what I meant was it doesn't work in such a way that if you don't already believe it, if you don't have those eyes on, it's not going to convince you. I couldn't go into a room of people who didn't believe, and you look at the Bible, there's stories of what, I haven't read it in a while, so I forget, but, Moses and stuff, like with the going to Egypt, the Egyptians and trying to free the Jews and stuff. And you'd throw the staff on the ground and it would turn into a snake, or with I think it's Elijah with the God's gonna light the bonfire on fire, and that'll show you that he's real. I have never had that. I have never seen or heard of a contemporary person proving to atheists or non-believers that God has power by praying for something supernatural for it to happen and it happening. And that's telling to me. Like when you say prayer works, what kind of prayers are you talking about? And when I say it doesn't work, I think what the prayer that I'm talking about is a prayer that cannot be explained by common sense or just kind of regular circumstance. I mean, look, people get cancer. That happens to Christians and non-Christians. Some people get well, and some people don't. Prayer might make the experience more pleasant or less pleasant, depending on the circumstance of the prayer. But I don't see evidence that it is affecting outcomes at some kind of rate that it could be used to show to be provided as evidence for the existence of God. That's what I mean. It doesn't seem to be moving the bar of actual outcomes, in my opinion. And I haven't seen that. I'm open to be corrected on that. But that's what I meant. Okay. The other episode we did was on salvation, which is such a big, interesting topic to me. And there's more to say on it. One of the comments that I got back, and it's not something new to me. It's something that I was aware of and am aware of, is that, Dave, there's actually kind of newer teaching, relatively speaking, in the church about hell, where maybe we've got it wrong. That the kind of traditional doctrine about hell and punishment and torment is not actually true, and that if you kind of listen to these newer teachings and understand them, that you'll come to see that what God meant was, what's actually true is that maybe people who aren't believers just sort of cease to exist, that there is not an eternal, or maybe there's like a period of like purgatory, whatever, like there's kind of a transition time for people who've not yet come to understand how good God is. That will allow them to come to that understanding, so that then they get into. So there is not an eternal state for people who are separated from God. That's not biblical, and also it's interesting. Interesting when I hear people talk about this stuff, because the claim is usually twofold. One, we found out what the Bible really says, and the second claim is sort of it has to be this, because the first thing, what we've been understanding, is just sort of, it's just so egregious. It's just so, it doesn't pass like the kind of common sense scrutiny test, right? It just doesn't seem right or good. And, there's a lot to talk about there, but I'm just going to focus on, I want to get into like God, Father God, like Old Testament versus New Testament, like God versus Jesus is kind of how I pit it. But I'm going to actually save that for when we do a talk on the Bible. I think it fits more better there. But that's something, and we'll get back to that in a different episode. But today I want to talk about, just kind of set this up. We're talking about culture and how I've seen Christians, differences in how Christians view culture and kind of the progression of history over time. One view that I've seen, that I would guess this suggestion that we have, a new understanding, and it doesn't make sense. Wow, God couldn't do that, would be out of this idea of culture and progression of history, which would be this, that the Spirit of God is sort of working over time to guide us into truth, that God is working with us to make us more like Him, not just individually, but corporately. And so they would point to. It's tricky because they're not always talking about culture at large. It might just be that that's happening with, but the sense that things are getting better, that we're getting better, that we're getting a better idea, that our value for human life is getting higher. Our systems are, just the average lifestyle of a citizen is better than it was 1,000 years ago. Do you know what I mean? We care more, and that's not. They would point to things like like the rule of law, like healthcare for us up here in Canada anyway, homeless shelters, right? Like we have things in place that we didn't have a long time ago because we care about people more than we used to care about people. Okay, that like 2,000 years ago, like if you're poor and you starve, like okay, goodbye. Nobody cared. That's I think that's my sense, that there was a lot more acceptance of, well, you're a meaningless person, so you die in a meaningless way, whatever. Whereas today there's we have human rights, and all human life has dignity and a right to these different things. There's more a sense of that than we used to have. We're not sacrificing slaves and babies on altars to blood gods anymore. I mean, like, there's been some progression as humanity, and slavery in North America was abolished. I mean, there's been these markers that say we're moving towards a better way, and that God is helping that along. Not that every culture shift has been good or positive, and certainly we're dealing with things right now that are bad and terrible and horrible and awful, but it's sort of a generally it's not really a commentary on how good things are. It's a comment on how bad things were. But there's this sense of progression. And when you have that idea of that's how it's going, there's this kind of openness to new ideas, new interpretations, new thoughts. Okay? And almost you're hoping that comes because it's supposed to. That's evidence that the system is working, right? That there's this new breath being breathed into these things, right? And young people in particular usually love this stuff. This would be who I am. I'm probably a progressive person. That would be my guess. And then the second view on that I see, and I would say maybe even the more dominant one, hard to say, hard to quantify that, but I would guess, is their view of culture and the progression of history is kind of basically, I would sum it up as saying, the worst game of broken telephone of all time, where Jesus said the first sentence, the red rabbit jumped over the clear white river and dove into the thorn bush, and 2,000 years later of cultural secularism, the bastardization of the message. And, now we have, Biden for president, I don't know why I went there. I thought it was going to be funny. I'm sorry. It was a political joke. I should stay in my lane. My bad. But you get what I'm saying. It just this idea that that culturally and throughout history, all that really is an opportunity to lose what we had. And so, the secular, we got to avoid the influence of secularism, and we have to, even our own minds and hearts, that idea of holding scripture up to scrutiny. There's also stuff in the Bible about, my own heart and my own head will deceive me, right? So I can't trust me. I can only trust the words on the page. And we'll get into that more when we talk about the Bible. But there's this kind of built-in stuff of, hey, does hell make you feel all kind of, does it make you feel sad inside? Does it, do you feel like your rights are being avoided? Like, there's kind of this sort of almost like you're turning into a huge suck culture, and why can't you just accept hell the way God meant it to be. Do you know what I mean? I hope I'm still making sense here. But anyways, with that idea that we have something precious, that it's like we're holding water in a bowl that's this pure water, and we're constantly protecting it from being spat into by other people, and from holes appearing in the bottom of the bowl and the water draining out slowly. There's this real sense of we've got to cling and hold on to something and protect it. And I think if you talk to Christians in North America, especially over the last, say, 50 years, a lot of them would feel like there's been this battle, and they're starting to lose it. That the grip on the bowl is loosening. Some guy peed in it at this point. The water, I don't even know. And we've gotta take it back. It's a strong thing. And if that's your mindset, then when someone says, "Hey, I have a new way to read the Bible," and guess what? It jives more with current cultural sensibilities. That person goes, "Uh-huh. Oh, really?" There's not only not openness to progression along those lines, but there's actually built in like an alarm system against that. And this is a difficult thing for Christians to deal with in church, because there is enough in the Bible that people from both of those thoughts and mentalities can read the Bible and think it guess what? It enforces what I think. They can arrange the information in such a way as to support the conclusion they've already drawn, and they can be in the same building together and even talk nicely to each other, and yet be very deeply divided on some of this stuff that matters, and maybe not know that about each other until they get into a talk about it. And when they do, to me, that's why we see churches splitting. We see, there's been so much ripping and tearing within denominations, and I think it's along these lines. How do you view the progression of history? Is God in it? Is God trying to protect from it? And the Christian kind of word for what you need to get through that is something called discernment. I think I'm not sure if that's how Christianese that word is. I've been in the church such a long time. I sometimes I know some of the words I use are Christianese and some of them are not. But discernment, do people use that word outside of church? Maybe they do. But I think inside a church, discernment means kind of knowing what's from God and what's not from God. That's how I would describe it anyways. And I can recall a Christian looking at me and telling me that they had discernment multiple times. And I remember what an awkward situation that put me in, because it reminded me of that Bible tract I spoke of in episode 1 of this, where it was, how do you know the Bible is true? Because it says it's true. How do I know you have discernment? Well, because I have discernment, Oh, well then don't I need a third person to confirm that? And they need to have discernment? Well, and how do I know if they have right? And so it becomes this kind of ridiculous thing. And it becomes almost so impossible to understand who has discernment and who doesn't. It's not worth talking about, so I'm not going to. But it's a very difficult thing. And I think it explains why Christians are on opposite sides of the fence on so many issues throughout history. I mean, if you really dig into like slavery and the end of slavery, I mean, there's Christians on both sides of that. There are Christians absolutely saying, God created everybody. God loves all humans. This is not right. You can't treat people like this. That is a son or daughter of God. That is a child of God. You got to free them. And that's fantastic. That's that's awesome. That's evidence to me of a good thing, a good effect religion has had. The problem is there were also Christians on the other side who quoted scripture about that condoned slavery. And I think also this idea that, I mean, I don't know what was in those particular Christians' hearts because I'm more on the progressive side. I like to think they were just evil and it was all about, well, they were really just greedy. They just wanted their plantation money or whatever. I don't understand history. And they, you know, they were just, they knew it was going to cost them. So they were pretending to be Christian, using Christian language, but really they weren't. But that's a straw man thing that you shouldn't do and I shouldn't do. There was probably many of them who were, that's genuinely what they thought God wanted. And they were using the Bible to defend their position. So we have, that's a lot. That's a lot. So all that to say, I can understand why there's so much tension in the church around all sorts of subjects, all sorts of topics. And in particular, whenever someone says, hey, we got some new teaching that comes from a biblical perspective, really there's the smell of liberal progressiveness to it, you know? And maybe that is what kept some people from wanting slavery to be abolished. This is a new liberal thought, isn't it? This is really about this, isn't it? Right? Kind of a built-in kind of skepticism from that side. And I would say for me personally, I tend to lean more progressive. You know, we can't go back. We can only go forward. So I'm all for let's go forward. You can't halt history. You can't stop culture from shifting and changing. The church has changed a bunch of times already, guys. A bunch of times. It's way different than it used to be. And even church from 50 to 100 years ago was way different than it was 100 years before that. So to think that you can somehow hit the pause or the rewind button is delusion. And the only option is to keep rolling. And if you're not going to keep rolling, you know, you better get off the boat. But even for me, as I consider a fairly progressive person, I have some issues with anything that's a new interpretation of something we've had for a while as a way for me to feel better about that topic. So let's take hell, for instance. For there to be new teaching on hell that makes me feel better. Okay, people aren't being tortured forever. People aren't being separated from God forever. I feel better about that. That checks my box of, is God good if this is the way things are set up? Yes, I think I can buy that for 200, Alex. Here's why I don't just need it to be good. I also need to feel like it's true. And so the issues that come up for me are, number one, like if that's true, if there is no hell, and if a non-believer dies, they just cease to exist. If that's true, like, why didn't Jesus just say that? Like, just say it. Like, talking about culture. I mean, so much, like, the cool stuff that Jesus did, and again, we'll get more into this with the Bible talks. I don't want to say it all now, but he did some really cool stuff in his life, if what we have recorded actually happened. Let's assume it did. He did some cool freaking stuff, man. But the stuff that he did was cool for his culture, right? He speaks to a woman at a well, right? I spoke to a woman at a water fountain. Nobody wrote a book about me. But at the time, for Jesus, culturally, he was crossing boundaries, right? He was doing things that weren't that were revolutionary in his day, and that maybe started us on a new path. But he didn't lay out, and you would expect that from someone who was a person at the time who had a sense of, hey, there's a better way to do it. This is ridiculous. Let's do this. Why? I can't talk to a woman. Of course I can talk to a woman. Let's talk to her. As opposed to someone who knew the future and knew 2,000 years from now, You know what I mean? Like, why didn't Jesus just think to himself, hey, just in case there's a guy with a podcast 2,000 years from now who's not sure about having problems with hell and the concept, let me just set the record straight. This is how it is. Why did he just do that? Why would he not lay out clearly how this works? Instead, let's have teaching that actually hints towards this other thing being real, this actual hell, and then not bother clarifying. That's not a test. That's poor planning. Okay? And I'm not a great planner or an organizer, but even I am like, yeah, that's not a good plan, dude. Right? And kind of tied into that, it's, we then went through a long period of history with this sort of understanding. And why would God allow us to have such a wrong understanding for so long? There's probably been people who've been driven away from faith because of the concept of hell. Well, if only there was a way to fix that. Or if only we could have seen that coming. It just seems to me like that's a pretty poorly run PR campaign. If 2,000 years later, someone's like, "Hey, wait a second! I don't think we read these instructions right. We've been playing the DVDs backwards for thousands of years." You know what I mean? So, yes, I want to believe. Yes, I'm aware that there's different teaching out there right now on Scripture, and yes, I want to, when I hear them, believe them. But it doesn't take away from me the questions of why then why this? Why has that mindset existed for so long? Why has there not been more clarity on it? Why hasn't God spoken up on it? Why do we have to wait till now? Is that more likely, that scenario? Or is it more likely that that maybe there isn't a God in the way that you're thinking, who's thinking things through and has these plans, and instead, as humans, as we've gone through this, we get inspired by something, and we take steps forward from the spot we're at, and cumulatively over time, we end up walking somewhere. Do you know what I mean? And that, yeah, there's holes and discrepancies in this ancient text. There's room in it to find to say, well, I'm going to organize the information in this way now so we can come to this conclusion. There's room there, not because God was some master author of the Bible with this cryptic truth, but maybe it's just because it's written by a bunch of humans over a long period of time with different understandings of God. And so there's room in it to mess around with it. That just seems more likely to me. Right? So, you get out. Look, with me, you get out of the frying pan, you get into the fire sometimes. But all that to say, thank you guys for the feedback. It helps me progress my mind. I am taking them in. I hope I'm not just saying negative things back to you guys. It does impact me, and I am thinking it through. And I appreciate all of it. I'm thinking next week we're probably gonna tackle the Bible. That feels like the right time to do it. It's gonna be a big one. Hopefully, I can say what I need to say, and have the right time to prepare, so I do it justice. But yeah, thank you guys again for listening, and as I said, the feedback. And we'll catch you next time. Later.